Okay, thanks everyone for joining. My name is Brion Hurley. I'm not going to be doing much talking, so that's great. We've got a couple guests, and this will be a panel discussion. We're going to talk about careers for ISE in nonprofits and government. Okay, so I think if you come to other sustainability sessions, heard a lot of discussion around how do we get these skill sets and tools into some of these sectors that haven't had a lot of the focus and attention and people with that skill set coming into that to face some of those challenges. As we look at things that are more complicated and require more systems thinking and applications, I think it's really important that we figure out what are some of the ways you can work into those fields that maybe there's not a job listing that says process engineer or industrial engineer or systems engineer, right? So think about some questions as we're going through here. We've got three great guests who can share their experience working in non-traditional roles. And then we'll open it up for questions that you have. So appreciate you guys all being here. And my interest in this is, I worked in aerospace for 18 years. Really enjoyed that work. Learned a lot. But then as I started learning about more of our environmental challenges and social challenges going on, and seeing the connection between the tools I was using at work with what was missing in those areas, I got really excited that we could kind of transition slowly into that kind of work. So I do consulting right now, but trying to work more with my clients and my clients that are interested in this. And so tomorrow there's a presentation on one of the projects I helped with at a nonprofit. We're looking at trying to streamline that process. And so the more you can make those processes run better, then the more time they can spend on other things they can do for residents and people in need. So it's really exciting. Okay, so first off, we've got John, and then we've got Rick, and then we've got Stephanie. So John, do you want to start us off?
Sure. And one thing I want to mention about Brion, and actually in the future, we give out annually an award for Best Sustainability Practice Award for nonprofits in government, and Brion's been spearheading that for the last 5 years or so. And this year, the winner of that award was Massport, where they've done an amazing job of an amazing job of implementing lean on their engineering and construction, and even the way in which they operate their capital improvement program organization. Unfortunately, the state of Massachusetts is still at the point where they're not authorizing paid travel outside of the state, so they can't be here, otherwise they'd be giving a presentation too. But we're going to do a webinar with them in the fall, which is just one other example of this happening in government, and some of the stuff that Brion's been doing has been great in that regard, so thank you. In the earlier one, people stood up because I think we don't have a table, we don't really have a panel, we're just sitting here, so I think I'll follow the example of the previous speakers and just say, my name is John Corliss. I am the Senior Vice President and Chief Engineer for Pure Consultants, which is a environmental firm. We do sustainability types of work. My background is, I attended Purdue University. I got a master's in industrial engineering, a master's in public policy, and a bachelor's degree in urban systems. So I've always been very interested in how do you apply systems thinking, systems engineering, industrial engineering tools to public sector problems. I've been very involved in the Institute of Industrial Engineers and started the sustainability track about 15 years ago, I guess. I don't know, I lost track. And I think one of the important things for this is, in addition to being a member of IISE, I'm also a member of the International Society of Sustainability Professionals and the Water Environment Federation and the American Water Works Association. So I think it's important to understand your profession, but it's also important to understand the areas in which you're applying that profession. And so that kind of networking is important. Yeah, you went too quick. Okay, go ahead. just some of the public sector work that I've done. I think if you just go one.
Up there.
Okay. I started off as an intern in Detroit in the Mayor's Office of Productivity Improvement. Then I moved to the Department of Energy in the Policy Office. From there, I went back home and led redevelopment of some urban historic district. In doing that, I started a nonprofit to produce a music festival, and then I got hired to do the startup of a community foundation, and from that, I went to do some process improvement work at Emerson College and ended up being their financial aid director. Strange. Then, after that, I got a job in the British, leading the development of a wastewater master plan. I went to the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority where I became the head of planning for wastewater. I then went to the British Virgin Islands where I led a plan for them, for their national wastewater plan. I did a strategic plan for the West Africa Water Initiative and some work for UNICEF. Then I went to Louisiana and led recovery planning for after Hurricane Katrina. And now I am at Peer Consultants, where among other things, we're putting solar systems on the roofs of municipal buildings, schools and such. And you know, one of the things about this is what's the common denominator about all of this? This is a wide variety of things. There's a couple of things about it. One is, I knew nothing about energy, and with it, you know, got a job doing the work for the National Energy Plan on what energy demand is going to be, what world oil prices are going to be, and I'm speaking in front of people from Pemex talking about what is world oil prices going to be, knowing nothing about energy when I took the job. I had never really done a redevelopment job in my life, did that, got hired, you know, I certainly had never produced a folk festival. I had taken one course in water, wastewater, in environmental engineering, and got hired to head wastewater planning for the MWRA. You know, like I said, I was an intern in financial aid in college. I suddenly found myself as head of the financial aid department at a college. You know, didn't know much about floods or anything either, and led the development of 3 recovery plans in Louisiana. And I think that the thing that ties these all together is they're public sector problems. They require system thinking, they require creativity, program management. Earlier today, Tiff Kramer gave a presentation, and one of the things that she said is that program management, as opposed to project management, is one of the sort of under appreciated skill sets that industrial systems engineers have. Because I could step into all of those different situations, and I could very quickly see how all of the pieces fit together. I didn't have to be an expert in all of those pieces. I'm not an expert in all of those pieces. You know, I'm not an expert in most of the things Peer Consultants does, but I have experts who work for me. And I know how to put together a multidisciplinary team. I know how to see where the issues are and how to make that work. And that is a very valuable skill set that industrial systems engineers have. And also, I'll say this too, a lot of these are daisy-chained networking types of things. You know, I got the job in doing the redevelopment of a historic mill district. On the board of that was somebody who then was on the board of starting up a community foundation, and said, I like the work you did there, can you help us set this up? And then one of the members of the board of that community foundation was the president of Emerson College, who said, I like the work you did on that, can you come and help me out on this? So it's that kind of networking and working your way through that helps you get into these kinds of work, this kind of work along the way. I'll hit the next one. So, you know, what are ways to apply ISE in the public sector? As I said, Massport just won our award for their lean stuff, but it's like public management. One of the things that most people don't understand is that public management and industrial engineering both trace back to the scientific management movement of the late 1800s. In fact, the same year, it was the same year that the first MBA program was started at Harvard, the first industrial engineering program was started at Penn State, and the first city manager was hired. You know, it all came from the same roots. But we don't think of it that way. We think of, well, industrial engineers, we go off and work in a manufacturing plant. Doesn't have to be that way. You know, increasing efforts to improve efficiency and continuous improvements, you know, and sustainability is all about that, zero waste. But many don't see that as an industrial engineering thing. They think, oh, well, somebody else does that, not us. Many of the people don't make the link between that energy and waste reduction work that ISEs do and the fact that when you go and look at the Sustainable Development Goals and sustainability, it's all about that. And so you go into organizational meetings and say, well, isn't sustainability about environmental engineers or environmental studies people or you know, these other folks? What do industrial engineers have to do with that? We have everything to do with that. And as I said, there's examples like Massport. The city of Detroit has a lean team. The city of Baltimore, who I've done some work with, their DPW office of strategy and performance, where they have performance measures and continuous improvements efforts. Lots of municipalities have these kinds of things in place. And there's one more. So, you know, what is it that I would recommend for people? You know, first of all, and again, I'm going to repeat what Tiff said before, and because I fell into this trap. When I first started, it was like, well, if I wanted to do good, I had to do that as a volunteer, or I had to discount myself and make less money than I should be making to support my family. I had an aha moment when I was on a board of directors of a nonprofit organization, and one of the things that we were doing, and we did a study with somebody and we were recommending, we were saying, you know, the people who should really be on the board of the nonprofit are people who can afford to donate to the nonprofit at least, you know, in 4 figures, preferably 5 figures. And I'm like, I can't do that. And I'm on the board telling the board that they should have people not like me. So I need to go out and be able to make enough money so I can be on this board. That volunteering my time isn't going to generate that. I can have a bigger impact by going out and applying my skills in a different way. And so I moved to other jobs where I could actually earn what my value was at the same time that I was doing good. And that gave me more resources to then give back to the areas I was interested in. Do research. You know, join organizations. Like I said, not just us, sustainability professionals. There's an annual conference called Lean in the Public Sector. You know, there's all sorts of things around where you can meet people, but you got to be creative when you're looking at the job listings, because you're not going to find a job listing that says, you know, or it's unlikely. I mean, there are some, and there'll be some other people talking where sometimes there's going to be an ad, you know, for the post office or something that says, I'm looking for an industrial engineer. But a lot of times it doesn't say that, you know, and like the job I got in the British Virgin Islands, they were looking for somebody who was a civil engineer who knew how to design wastewater treatment plants. I had no clue how to design a wastewater treatment plant. But I said to them, this is not a wastewater treatment plant, this is a planning problem. This is an issue of people and politics and technology and the environment, and you need somebody like me to lead that project, not a civil engineer who knows how to do a wastewater treatment plant. They said, well, maybe you're right. And I got the job, but that's not what they were looking for. So you got to look at these job postings creatively and learn how to frame your expertise in a way that works. One of the stories I've told many people is when I was doing facilitating a conference for UNICEF in Africa, one of the people stood up and was talking about the work that his office does, and they were doing it in water and health and safety. And but they were having a real hard time getting the government to support, to pay money for these services, even though everybody said, oh yeah, we're for healthy people, we want to save babies, we want to save, women, but they couldn't get any money from the government to do that. And somebody said, well, look, reframe it. Because for one thing, the Minister of Health is not the one who controls the budget. It's the Minister of Finance. And the Minister of Finance is going, oh great, we're going to have more babies live, which means we're going to have more kids, we're going to need more services, I can't afford the services that we're providing now. You want me to get excited about this? But if you go back in and say, again, and I mentioned this a little earlier, that the means to doing this is health, but one of the outcomes, instead of focusing on the outcome of healthy babies and mothers, focus on the outcome is going to be, you're going to have healthy workers who are going to attract industry, who are going to generate tax dollars so that you can pay for these services. That's a message the finance officer is going to listen to. So you got to learn how to frame your expertise, frame your experience, so that it resonates with the person that you're listening to. So that's my view on it, and we'll go on to the next before the discussion.
Okay. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Brian. And my thanks to John for inviting me to this. I'm Rick Haberlin, Chief Engineer of the Modeling and Simulation Division of the MITRE Corporation. And I'll talk about what the MITRE Corporation is. It's the, for any of you who are Tom Clancy fans, Jack Ryan's cover is the MITRE Corporation. When he's writing for the CIA and all that stuff. But anyway, it is a real company, it does exist. The neat thing about this little discussion is the difference in the panelists. So my avenue to get here is completely different than John's. I spent 20 years in the Navy as a naval flight officer. Then I went out and I did DoD industry as a contractor for 5 years. And then I came to MITRE, and I'll talk about why that's different than regular contracting in a minute. You can see my degree stuff there, but what's more interesting to me is the professional associations, and John touched on this, and I will too. So I'm the track chair and the president-elect of the Modeling and Simulation track, or the Modeling and Simulation division here, but I also spend time in the Military Operations Research Society, and their conference is next month. And then I'm also members of MOA and the American Society of Civil Engineers, but I'm not a civil engineer if you look over on the left. So, and the other thing is, you look at the degrees, I didn't pay for any of them. So thank you to your parents who are all taxpayers. But 2 of those were in the Navy and the other was paid for by the good citizens of the US. So that is one of my crowning achievements, is I never paid for my education. Okay, FFRDC, you'll hear people say FFRDC or FERDIC or anything like that. What is it? And I think it's important to say that when we talk in the realm of not-for-profits and or government. It is a not-for-profit, and it is solely in the public interest, and that is actually our tagline. If you've ever heard of a UARC, that's a University-Affiliated Research Center. So you hear names like Georgia Tech Research Institute, MIT Lincoln Labs, Johns Hopkins APL. Those are UARCs, University-Affiliated Research Centers. So we are similar to that, but we're not affiliated with a university. We cannot compete. So Boeing is a sponsor here. We can't compete with Boeing to go do work on a contract for the government. We sign non-competes, we sign non-disclosure agreements, and we are free from conflict of interest. So because we are in that position, and we can't bend metal, so folks like Boeing, they build things for the government or for private industry. We can't do that. We can prototype, and if they like our prototype, they license it and we turn the prototype over, and if Boeing outbids Northrop Grumman, then Boeing builds something that we prototype. So we don't build the actual thing for the government, we prototype it, and that's how we can stay free of conflict of interest. But because we're in that position, we're then treated as government plus. So we're like the trusted agent of the government. We get sort of the government opinion. We're on the government team, but we're not government. So we're contract, but we're more on the government side of the contract. So you also hear the term think tank, and typically they throw RAND out there and things like that. We're in the same realm of RAND and the other think tanks, but MITRE in particular is systems engineer focused. So we're about 10,000 people. It's not small. And MITRE is the company. So MITRE is not technically an FFRDC. MITRE is a not-for-profit, but MITRE operates 6 FFRDCs. And they're not the only 6. There are about 40 FFRDCs in the US. But you can see it covers all kinds of the government there. So the biggest portion of us is the NSEC, which is DoD and the intelligence community. Then we have an FFRDC for Homeland Security. That's obviously fairly young. CASD, the Center for Advanced Aviation Systems, is FAA. So if you think about, they're working on the next generation air traffic control system. They're working on flight safety as automated aviation starts to happen, or we get air taxis and UAVs and all that. That's under that one. Center for Enterprise Modernization is kind of the catch-all for a lot of stuff. Treasury, Veterans Affairs, IRS, I forgot, DOE, Department of Energy's on there, Social Security. Those are all bucketed under that one. Then we have a health component, Center Alliance to Modernize Healthcare, and that deals particularly with HHS. And then our most recent one just came out 2 years ago, National Cybersecurity, FFRDC. So you can see we cover a broad brush of what the government does. Our headquarters is in McLean, Virginia, but we have 66 sites around the globe. So we are at most cities where there's a big DoD presence, and then our biggest part of the company is in Washington. So, okay, and what I did is that's it, that's FFRDC, and now I'll talk about, from your perspective, what I would recommend. You know, when we start to think about, I want to get into this area, and things, had I had a regular college on to business career path, when I look at people who are coming up, these are the things I think about. If you are in this space, industrial engineering, systems engineering, how can you be most marketable? And these are the ones that I kind of came up with, is apply systems thinking. And this is in the realm of not-for-profit, right? So they're in priority order. The biggest thing when you deal with the government is, number one, they are non-technical. The majority of people in government are not technical, but they have really complex problems. So if you are a systems thinker, and that's what your education is, you can break down a problem into systems engineering. And so you think about, MITRE is 10,000 systems engineers, but we have a Center for Alliance with Medical. So how does that align? Well, you look at processes and procedures, and just take a hospital and look at the process they have for doing the laundry. And if they're doing it inefficiently, that's millions of dollars a year. You take away that problem, refine the process, spend those millions on more staff, you improve healthcare, and on and on and on. So everything can be broken down into a systems thinking problem. That's what the government doesn't do well. They're well-intentioned, but they have a different education. So that is the biggest thing you can bring, is if you deliver your message to the government from a systems perspective, you start to aggregate and disaggregate their problems into bite-sized chunks that you can then hand over, and you can model pieces of it, you can simulate pieces of it, you can do data analysis on pieces of it, but they can't get beyond that. We have a huge problem. I don't understand it. The second piece is be impactful, and that's a very happy thing to say, but you can actually, again, with the systems thinking, you trace your impact. So think about what change do you want that government organization to have. I want them to have better records for cancer patients. Okay, so how do you, that's the impact. How do you break that apart? How do you trace from that to something concrete that you're going to work on as a task for the next 6 months? If you can do that, and we drive a process that does that. We look for what we want to accomplish, we look for the data-driven decision that's going to get them to that, and then we break that data-driven decision into deliverables that produce that decision. If you can keep doing that, you can connect all the work you do to something impactful at the end. And what they need help with is getting beyond the, I need to boil the ocean to solve something. So you laugh, you don't solve world peace. Well, you don't solve it all at once. You know, you got to break it into little pieces. And the last one there, a lot of people are really eager to, to get their name out there, but in this world, and to John's point about networking, it's gradual. So you start with just volunteering at a low level, you get your name out there, and it happens quickly after that. So once you attend more than one conference, you become a familiar face, they ask you to do something, you bite the bullet, you say yes, you do it, and next thing you know, you're invited to more, you're asked to speak more, you end up at panels. But volunteer organizations run on the people, not on the organization itself. You'll find that out more and more. So don't spread too thin. That's the other alternative, is you want to volunteer, but then deliver on what you volunteer on. Instead of volunteering for 20, volunteer for 2, and do really solid work on 2, get your name out there, and then eventually you can expand beyond that. But we do appreciate any help we can get in the volunteer organizations, and I'm speaking as a board member. But anyway, so that's my pitch. I think that's all I have, right? Happy to answer questions afterwards.
Well, I will second what Rick mentioned about the diversity of the panel, and my background and experience has been very different from John's and Rick's. I currently work as an energy engineering consultant at the CSEU with 3 consultants. I work with John. Before that, I got a master's in engineering management with a focus on environment and energy. And I will reiterate about the education. I didn't pay for my education either. I got 2 scholarships to study my undergrad and a scholarship to study at GW in Washington, D.C. And that's when I moved from Mexico to Washington, D.C. And it's almost 5 years that I moved there. I recently got my degree in associate certification, and I'm an active volunteer member at the National Chapter of ISE, which is mostly with mechanical engineers. I am the only industrial that I've known so far volunteering for that organization. As far as my experience in the public sector or non-profit, I haven't worked directly with the government, but indirectly. My first experience was at Gonzalez, Mexico's federal poverty alleviation agency. I did an internship there for 6 months in rural warehouses, and then my professor, who had his own consulting company in process improvement, invited me to work in a project in the headquarters in Mexico City. So I got a very interesting experience working both in the warehouses and the headquarters. The second experience I had was when I was studying my master's. I got an internship at the Embassy of Mexico in the Secretariat of Energy. And that was interesting because I did a lot of research of energy projects between the US and Mexico, mostly companies in the US that were interested in investing on energy projects, especially renewable energy projects in Mexico. That changed with the change of administration from Mexico, so that's a whole different story. But I did a lot of research, and I think that was my aha moment of I think I really like energy, so I will just get my path there, and I wanted to get a job in energy efficiency, and I got it with 3 consultants in the CSEU. And again, this is an indirect job with the government. The DCSU has a contract with the local Department of Energy and Environment of Washington, D.C., and we basically manage projects in energy efficiency in the district. And how I think that ISEs can contribute, or with the non-government, non-profit or government world, I've seen both in my internship in the Gonzalez and the job I am doing now, I've seen how policy, or the impact of policy in the main users is not very well thought sometimes. People in headquarters, people in policy, sometimes they think that they know what the end users will need, especially talking about low-income residents or people who live in rural areas. And a few people actually get to know or experience and live the real world that they live day to day. So sometimes there's a mismatch in that sense, and I think as industrial systems engineers, going back to what Rick was saying about systemic thinking, that can be applied to anything, I think that is a great example of getting to know all the parts of the system and how a new policy will impact the main user. The second thought I wanted to share was the change of thought in working for nonprofits. In my current job, we offer money for energy savings. So our goals are not determined by minimizing cost and maximizing profit, but it's how can we get the most energy savings with the less money. And we get the goals by how much energy savings we're getting by dollar invested, and we give money back. So our goals are determined by how much money are we investing, how much money we're spending, and how much energy savings we're getting from that investment. So yes, I will highlight the systemic thinking application. Process improvement can be applied not only in the manufacturing world, but administrative processes, in offices, consulting processes, in your day-to-day lives and office jobs, like in every aspect that you can think of, systemic thinking can be applied. And yes, I think as ISEs we have the skills of thinking of the big picture, of thinking out of the box, being creative, as John was sharing before. And another factor that sometimes we forgot is the human behavioral aspect. So we might have the most brilliant technical project, and I experienced this in Viconza. I knew that the job, the project I was working on, because of the political issues, my project was not going to be implemented, and that was very frustrating. So we might have the best ideas, but if we don't know how to deal with the human factor, if we don't know how to talk to people, to convince them, to understand their perspective, as John was sharing before, our project might not move forward. So that's an important thing to remember, and that's all I had to share. Thank you.
Okay. Let's start with questions. Anyone have any questions for anyone specifically on the panel?
I guess I have a question for you about the FEMA work, because I guess that's the exact field I wanted to go into, disaster response and recovery. Like, how did you, did you have your FEMA job while you were working another job? Like, was it a part-time one, or did you go full-time, full force on the ground there?
Yeah, well, for that, and then again, talk about networking and where things come from the strangest things. My daughter was in junior theater, and a friend of hers, mother, worked for a environmental placement company that was part of a large contract headed up by what is now called AECOM, a company that provided people to FEMA. And I literally got a phone call from this girl's mother saying, I know you do planning, I know you do urban systems things, We just got a request for like 300 planners need to be in New Orleans next week. Are you interested in going? And I was doing independent consulting at the time, and so I went. And the way those contracts work is that you're there, you're working 60, 70-hour weeks, you know, six days a week at least, and you're there for 4 weeks, and then you get a 4-day weekend home, and then you're back for 4 weeks, and you get a 4-day weekend home. What I was working on is a recovery plan, which is not the immediate response. It is, okay, now we've got, you know, tarps on all the roofs and everybody is okay, but the community isn't functioning yet. And how do we get the community back up and running so that, you know, you as quickly as possible, and quick could be over a 3 to 5 year period, you as quickly as possible are going to get jobs back in place, social services back in place, safety back in place, everything that makes a community actually operate. Because it's, you know, what FEMA realized was going in there and saying, okay, you know, it's like a lot of FEMA's people have a military background, and they go in with the, we're going to take this hill, plant the flag, then we're going someplace else. And what they realized is that after a disaster, you can do that, but that doesn't mean that, you know, yeah, people are safe and you've stabilized everything. You know, it's like when you go to the emergency room and they say, all right, now you're stabilized, you can leave the emergency room. Well, communities don't have any place to go after the emergency room is done. So that's where the recovery planning part comes in, is to begin to say to people, say how to do that. And I did those things. That was through FEMA. Some communities decided to do it themselves. Nashville decided to do it themselves, and so they went out for bid. And I was at Pier at that point, and I bid on that, and we got the contract to do the recovery plan for Nashville after they had flooding about 10 years ago. And so it really depends on the circumstance. It depends on whether or not the community is contracting out for it or FEMA's doing it. But then again, through networking, you can find ways to get involved in those kinds of things.
I'll offer one additional thing to that is, so I would, instead of concentrating on FEMA, think about what I want to do. Do I want to help build infrastructure? Do I want to help build communities? Do I want to, you know, so because FEMA's one organization, and they may or may not be hiring when you're ready. But there are lots of people that do electrical, water, sewerage, sanitary, whatever it is. Think about that. And if you do want to be FEMA, I want to be the director of FEMA, I want to work for DHS. That's my goal in life. You won't get there through FEMA. You'll go there through industry, and then you'll be a local guy, and, you know, so your path to get there will meander. But think about what kind of work you want to do. Because there's a lot of, to John's point, FEMA's this guy, but they hire all these contractors to do the work. So I want to do work like this. Well, you just need to find a company that does that, and there's a good chance that when the next hurricane rolls, FEMA's going to call them, and then you're going to be doing the work you want to do. So I would think about the kind of work I want to do rather than the organization I want to do it for. It takes away the narrowness of the scope, and it opens up a lot more opportunity.
Yeah, I was more so going to look through the systems, organization, and management track, especially like with the restoring the vital lifelines that FEMA has and how they prioritize that way. I guess I wanted to get some experience in industry and then piggyback off of that.
Well, and like Rick said, you know, when be visible, and it takes time. It's like I did the work in Louisiana, and then a year later, there was a big hurricane that went through Galveston, and I wasn't in a position to take the job, but I got a call from the FEMA people saying, would you be interested in heading up the entire recovery planning program for doing that? And that was because I had done 3 parishes under the overall umbrella in Louisiana, and people recognize it. So you build up slowly, and then people recognize it, and people call you.
Questions? My question strategy, you might not be able to implement it depending on who's airing the strategy. How do you guys deal with, I mean, that's out of your control, right? Like, what, I don't understand how you work around that.
I think, well, what I tried to do, because the politics were a major issue, there were people who I tried to interview, because the project I was working on was, the final deliverable was a set of recommendations of how to improve their processes in the headquarters. And so to understand how it worked, the process, the people who were involved, what were the inputs and outputs in the process of each person. I had to do a lot of interviews, and a lot of people closed the door to me, and they weren't willing to. They were like, I've been doing my job for 20 years, and I was still an undergrad, so I was like, they were like, you 20-year-old is gonna come and tell me how to do my job that I've been doing for 20, 30 years? No, bye. So that was a big challenge. I tried my best. I think the most risky thing that I did was intercepting one of these guys in the hallway, and I was like, 5 minutes, just give me 5 minutes, that's all I ask from you. And he was like, okay, I'm counting. And in 5 minutes, I got the most crucial answers that I needed in order to move on, because that was a bottleneck. It was like, I can make assumptions, but it won't be close to reality. So, I mean, I tried my best. I was like, he already said no. The worst thing that can happen is that you will say no again, and then I just walk away. I think it's just like trying to engage with people, trying to understand them, and trying to be on their shoes and be like, I understand. I just want to understand what you do so I can help. Like, I'm not here to criticize or to judge what you're doing or not doing. I just want to understand. So I think being empathetic and knowing how to talk to people, it's key. The rest, there are a lot of other factors that are not in our hands, but I was like, at least I tried my best. I will do the project, and then what happens next, that won't be on me.
That last part that Stephanie said is, if you're going to do work for the government or with the government, you have to make your peace with the fact that they're not going to always take your advice, and you just have to accept it. So you get to be an advisor to really high-level people, senators, 4-star generals, you know, and a lot of times they will be like, thank you, and we're going to go over here, and you can be frustrated and yell at your dog and complain to your spouse and all that stuff, and then the next day you just go to work, because that's just, they're going to do it for political reasons. They're going to do it because that might not be the most optimal solution, but it's going to get them reelected. You know, there's things that are not in the calculus that were in the model that you built, and a lot of that is my reelection. So,
It's not fair.
yeah, you make your peace with it early on, or you go to private industry where you don't have to do that. But that's one of the parts of being in the government.
But I would say, I'm not sure that private industry even, or any place, if you're an industrial engineer, you don't have to deal with it. Because by nature, I mean, you know, when they say, you know, engineers make things, industrial engineers make things better. Well, the people who made the things don't think that you know enough to make their thing better. It's, who are you, you know? I'm an electrical engineer, I designed this. Who are you to tell me that you can do it better? Or I'm a doctor, or I'm a whatever, you know? It's like, so if you're good at your job as an industrial engineer, you have to know the right questions to ask. You need to lead them to come to your conclusions, because if you go in and tell them, this is how you should do it, they're gonna say, who are you to tell me? You know? So you've got to develop those skills along the way, and you know, going even further from Rick, I mean, I got hired by the Carter administration, and suddenly I was working in the Reagan administration, you know, and I'm working on the national energy plan, and there's very different policy between the two, and so you just, you know, you do what you believe in, you do your job, and you, you know, as you said, you sort of make your peace with the fact that different people have different priorities, but it's important for you to understand. I mean, even with like UNICEF or nonprofits, try and understand what is motivating them. And as Stephanie said, you know, it's not like simple like in a manufacturing setting. We're minimizing costs. Although tomorrow I'm giving a talk on environmental justice and how now a lot of companies can't just minimize their costs because there are now regulations that you have to, you know, you're going to have multi-objective decision making on. But it's, you know, you have to understand what is driving them, what are their critical factors, and what are the things that you're trying to satisfy. And sometimes it, you know, it may not be obvious to you what is the success factor that you're supposed to be optimizing towards.
John brought up another good point right there. Was you can help yourself. So if you go in as an industrial engineer and say, this is a better way to do that, they're going to look at you and say you have no expertise. But if you build a multidisciplinary team that includes subject matter experts from that person's domain, it's a lot harder to ignore the engineer, right? So medical, you put an MD on the team, or you put a surgeon on the team for the surgical issue, or a licensed practicing nurse, or whatever. You build a team that has their domain on there, and then you throw in the economist, and you know, you put in things that they can't ignore, and then when they start throwing out, well, did you consider, you can say, yeah, this person brought me that. So going in as just the engineer is a losing proposition because you just don't have the expertise, unless you want to do calculus for them or something, you know, but that's not what they need.
I tell people, I think one of the things that we are is we're conveners. You know, we convene the multidisciplinary team. We know how to get the most out of the multidisciplinary team. And that's our strength, and that's a good role for us.
Also, I think another thing to keep in mind is asking the right questions. You're not the expert, they are, but asking the right questions will lead them to come up with a recommendation like, oh, actually, I'm having this issue, maybe I can do this. Like, it will, asking the right questions will make them think about that, and maybe they will consider the factors that we might ignore, but they know better than us, because that's what they do. They know better, but asking the right questions will make them think forward, and maybe they will ask, they will find the solutions themselves. We're only facilitators.
To follow up now, that sounds like a lot of psychology,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm hearing that the solutions being implemented is the human factor is what sounds like a
Lillian Gilbreth was originally a industrial psychologist, and she started industrial engineering. So, yes, there's a lot of psychology in there.
Thank you.
Yeah, so somewhat related to accepting things you can't control in psychology, with the heavier and more taxing things that kind of are implied by these types of careers, how do you kind of take yourself away from the heaviness and stuff like that? So I guess like if you're working with kids who are sick all the time or stuff like that, like doctors, they have to do that. Like as an IE, kind of how do you do that from the high level of knowing and understanding doesn't mean that you don't feel it kind of thing. So just kind of curious because your jobs are impactful, but it does sometimes come at a cost.
You know, so I think my former career insulated me against that somewhat. I mean, there was definitely, for me in particular, there was the deploy time and there was the home time, and you made the best of both, and I was able to compartmentalize those two. Other people deal with it differently. Some people, their spouse is in that same space, and that becomes someone you can talk to about how difficult it is. So it really depends individually on how you do it. In my family, I work in a space where I can't talk about most of what I do with my wife, and so it's a running joke. What did you have for lunch? I had this for lunch. You know, and that's basically the how was your day, because I can't talk about what I did. But I find also the impactful thing, like knowing that what I'm working on is going to have an impact, even if the impact is no one's trying to make something happen to make people's lives worse. So even if it's sad or it's heartbreaking to look at, you have to tie the impact you're doing, the small task you're doing, to a greater impact that achieves a greater good. So even if it's miserable to see, projecting forward 10 years, you would hope that something you did 10 years ago moves the meter for somebody, you know, even if it's small. So Anyway.
I mean, I had to say that it made me feel like an ambulance chaser when I said, the most fun I've ever had in my life is doing a disaster recovery plan. You know, because it's one of the few times when people are willing to get out of their silos. You know, it's like, it's not, you know, well, we need a safety plan and we need an infrastructure plan and we need a jobs plan and this is my domain and this is your domain. It's like, you know, yeah, we need to all get together and fix this as quickly as possible. And so, yes, it's a disaster, and yes, you see the devastation, and that part really hurts, but at the same time, you're seeing people work together in ways they don't normally work together, and that's really exciting and rewarding. And so, you know, it's like focusing on the good that you're doing to make a bad situation better instead of focusing on the bad situation for me.
I think I'm still learning how to compartmentalize. I think I'm still, but I agree with what John is saying. You know the issue, you can get to know the people, and I guess you can just keep the reward of the feeling that, okay, I'm doing something, even if it's small, you're making a contribution that might have a big impact on them. And just what is rewarding for me is seeing how people feel about what I do and just being empathetic. And by talking with people, sometimes they can be like, who are you and what are you doing? And then by talking to them, like they calm down and they're like, okay, they realize, okay, you're actually trying to help. So it's changing their mindset, and I'm like, okay, at the end, I'm trying to do something good, and that's the part that is rewarding for me. That's the part that you keep, and then you move on. We can't save the world, but we can make a small contribution, a small impact, little by little.
Yeah, actually I have a question. So when do you think we can not take an opportunity or drop an opportunity for an internship or volunteering? I know someone who was very interested in an industry engineer, who was very interested in policy making and understanding how things really go on the ground, right?
Yep.
So he joined a fellowship program with one of the mayor's offices, and he ended up writing articles for publications, preparing marketing material, preparing for meetings, taking notes. So, well, and this is eventually what he was not willing to do, or what he's willing to continue doing. So in that case, I know I want to be in the picture of the policy making and understanding more about this area. Should I take that opportunity just as an introduction to that, no matter what I'll be ending up doing, just, you know, as an entry point for me to that place? As in FEMA, for example, he wants to be in FEMA. Should he go for any opportunity that he's sure he will be able to work on that, but that's not actually what he wants to do in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, what somebody said earlier today is, you know, sometimes you just move laterally just for the experience, but, you know, and this goes to even the tool sets and what you can sell. Like I said, my background, I included simulation modeling, and I need to talk to Rick about something what they're trying to do as a joint sustainable development simulation group thing for a long time. But, you know, so I had simulation modeling experience, which is how I got into the policy office at DOE, you know, was because I could run simulation models. And from there, because I was running dynamic simulation models and systems dynamic and systems thinking, it just opened up a whole lot of possibilities. You know, the job in the productivity improvement division of the mayor's office, you know, that exposed me to a lot of different things. So when you have an opportunity to get some exposure like that, especially, you know, I mean, I know a lot of young people who ended up in Louisiana working on the recovery plans the same way I did. It was like, you know, they were available for a 3-month gig and they went for it and came out of it with this great experience that they then leveraged into other opportunities in the future because they could say, I worked on this and this is what I learned. So
I think none of these jobs are life sentences, right? So but the serendipitous interaction, you just don't know. You don't know what event is going to happen while you're in that position. You could be writing articles one day, and God forbid, something happens some major crisis happens in the city that week, and your whole life can completely shift. You just don't know. But in the meantime, if an internship is fairly short, you can cross paths with people who are going to make a lot of difference, either in your career, or if they don't, if it's a horrible place to work, that's an experience you can then point back to, and you can look at what were the indicators of that job that I'm going to look for before I say yes to the next one. What kind of questions did they ask me in my interview, which now I know are sort of indicators of a culture I don't want to be part of, or something like that. But I think testing the waters a little bit early in your career is a lot easier than later in your career.
Something that I will add, and it relates to what Rick was mentioning before, and has worked for me. You know what you want to do, so look for the job, look what you want to work on instead of the company. And something that I did when I was looking for a job in my master's was going to a lot of conferences. And I don't know here or where you live, in DC there are a lot of conferences that are for free. Besides offering free breakfast, I was going for the networking. And I tried to talk to people that work on the field that I was interested on. So I knew I wanted to work on energy efficiency. So whenever I heard someone that, regardless of the company, the job they were doing was meaningful for me, I will ask them for a conversational coffee or a quick call, or however I got to talk to them, to ask them about their experience, to get a better understanding of their day-to-day job, to see do I really want to work with this, or if I'm imagining it's something different than what the actual job is. Or maybe you figure out there's something else that you don't know it exists, and you're like, oh, maybe I'm more interested on that. So getting to know people that work on something that you are interested in, I think that can help, and it helps with networking. And instead of asking them hey, I like what you do, I like the company, can I get a job, can I get an internship, instead of going straight forward, can you get me a job, asking them about their experience and getting to know you, that might open more possibilities in a more casual way. And you can get, I think you get a better understanding of the job description from talking to people than just reading it in the job posting. And yeah, I think I will say you could try it, and if you don't like what you do, you might know people that do something that you want to do, but getting to know them and them to get to know you, they can actually tell you hey, there's this opportunity, come here.
I think I'll add too, probably that it's not even the skill you're doing, but how you interact and how you work. It's probably what they're going to recommend too. So if they know what you want to do, and then they see that you are prompt and you work well with others, and you show up and you have a good attitude, that stuff people are going to recommend. Say, if you're looking to another field, they're going to say, well, they did great work here, and I think they would fit in great into your other group, whatever the skill is that you're trying to bring to the table. So I think that doing a good job when you're there, setting a good example for what you provide, could lead to other opportunities that people have connections with you don't even know. Make a lot of sense.
I'll just add a quick thing here. So I see that many of the opportunities right now are remote, right? And I think this will reflect negatively on how you cook yourself, right? You're not actually interacting with the people on the website. I don't know what you
I think one thing is, if you're working remote, turn your camera on. Because, no, it's not obvious. Lots of people don't. And it's like a phone call, and you really don't get a sense of the other person. If you want them to get more of a sense of you, you need to make it so you're as present to them as possible. And having that little circle with your initials on it or whatever that's not a way to make it so you're memorable and they really get you.
We've really struggled with that, and it's not just interns, it's also our new hires. So we actually started kicking out now that people are coming back, we started kicking out our more senior people and giving the interns and first years their offices, because we definitely need to get people familiar with our culture. And the interns need to understand, if you come back, we give you a job, this is what it is here. And the people who've already come, they need to understand how we're different, and understand, these are the people that you're going to interact with, and this is the environment, even at the expense of angering some of the mid-career or senior career people who are now losing offices. It's all about real estate.
We don't necessarily have the office, we have a similar thing where as we move towards hybrid, new hires, we tell them, we want you to come into the office at least 4 days a week for the first 3 months. We may be more flexible after that, but it's important for you to get to know the company and the culture.
I actually started a volunteering position when COVID started. It wasn't a job, but it was in ASHRAE, the organization I mentioned before. Before COVID, I had the idea of joining the organization. And when COVID started, I had more time, and I was like, okay, maybe it's time to see what I can do. And I started volunteering, and it felt like an extra, not part-time job, but like a hobby. And I get to know a lot of people. They didn't turn on their cameras, and I just knew their faces about 3 weeks ago that we started events in person. But in my experience, they have been working with me. I have been working with them for 2 years, virtually with cameras off. But just by raising the hand and say hi, I'm available. And whenever they ask, is there someone who might be interested in doing this activity, virtual events, virtual happy hours to get the members engaged and active? And I was like, okay, I'll do it. I don't know how to do this, but I'll figure it out. Who has done this in the past that I can talk to get some material as a reference, as a baseline, and then I can get something done from there. So just by raising my hand saying I'm available, I got to know a lot of people, and now I feel like they know how I work in terms of volunteering, and it's a great opportunity to look for jobs too. And I think it's the same. I am a recent member from IISE, but I think it's the same, a similar approach. You get to volunteer, you get to know new people, even if it's virtual or in person. Virtual, yes, it's a little bit more challenging, but it's not impossible. As long as you are present, and instead of waiting to be told what to do, you can raise your hand and be proactive and take initiative, saying asking questions, getting to know people, even scheduling 15-minute calls hey, can I just talk? I just want to get to know you. What are you doing? What's your experience? To get to know the culture of the company, which virtually is very hard to, but I guess you can schedule a virtual coffee with someone, and you can just have a casual conversation.
I've got a question kind of percolating. I don't know if I can articulate it right, but I'm going to try. So John mentioned the thing about going from the Carter administration to the Reagan administration. And so I would guess there's probably a lot of projects where you all have something that's getting ready to go in or be implemented or whatnot. And maybe like a role changes or a new person's in the seat. And so they may want to pause, and we want to go a different direction, which is going to cause a ton of rework or productivity loss or cost or whatever that thing is. And I was wondering, do any of you have an example where you've been able to convince that person to maybe go with plan A to avoid maybe using the ISE mindset, the system thinking mindset, to illustrate the business case of actually going with the already existing path to avoid that rework and productivity loss? Does that make sense?
It's easiest to do in DoD, so easier than, in the political, in the appointed positions, it's harder because they are going to be loyal to the people who appoint them, and what you can lean on then is the long-term government employees. So, the political appointees are up here, but you have the government servants, the GS-15s and below, who are the steady state, and they stay in government as long as they want to, and the people above them, the leaders, are what come in. The best that we've done, and this is what we do in DoD as well, is when you identify this is going to happen. Some of the companies, like MITRE, for example, becomes on the transition team for certain areas. So Department of Energy transition team, And part of the job of each transition team is to build the preparation for the incoming political appointee who will know absolutely nothing about the space. Or he'll know something about the space, but not about the detail going on. They don't have the current knowledge. So by being on the transition team, you can kind of feed them, this is the ongoing work, this is why it's important, this is why it'd be bad to turn it off. You know, and so that's really the best you can do, because the government, the new leadership on the political side might just come in and go, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. On the DoD side, we can see it a little further out because they have tours that you usually know when they're going to end. Every once in a while, someone will get plucked, and then you can't do anything about it. But typically, you know when a senior official is going to retire or move on or whatever, and so you try to. It works the other way. You try to get them to commit to a plan before they go, because it'll be locked in. They're going to contract it, and then it's at least through the fiscal year, and they'll let you finish the work, and then you get to outbrief. And if you're far enough along, then that year or whatever of work is something you show to the new person, and then they either find value in it or they don't. So it's played a little bit differently depending on if it's a political position or a government or a DoD position.
What Rick touches upon is actually an important aspect of sort of working in nonprofits and working in government, which is the budget is short because, you know, like if you're working for a government, even federal programs, there's only one federal program that I know of that, with the exception of like long-term defense contracts and stuff, that can commit money for more than the current year, because Congress has to reapprove every year. And that was the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and they had it written into the enabling legislation that it was like a 5-year, if they sponsored a program in Mozambique or someplace, it was a 5-year commitment, because they didn't want to make it so that, you know, the country got a grant to do this, and after the first year there's a change of administration, change in Congress, and it gets pulled because of exactly what you said. But for the most part, everything has to be approved every year, and that's even in the case of us with work in DC, that's even the case there, because technically the U.S. Congress gets to approve the city budget, and it's on an annual basis. Now, usually they don't meddle, but you know, you never can tell. So it's what you're working on could come to a screeching halt at the end of the fiscal year, and that's just life. And a lot of nonprofits, you know, I mean, as you know, Joel, work sort of the same way, because they're based on, you know, what money do we have and what's the budget for the upcoming year, and we hope we can make it, you know. So there's a real tendency not to make long-term commitments on stuff like that.
You do also, so I talked about impacts, you try to set the impacts up that are not going to be politically offensive. You know, you try to set things up that are, it would be hard for either political party to go, that's a horrible idea. I mean, if you write the impact broadly enough, your deliverables year to year, or your data-driven decisions might be influenced by the incoming policy, but the impact that you're trying to achieve should be okay for either of them. You know, and that's another way to sort of insulate yourself. So you do work, you're drawing to here. The next year, this work might not be as valuable as if the incumbent had been reelected, but it's still data, you know, and so, okay, now it might be 1 year behind, but now I have 2 years of data, and maybe we tweak how we use it. But yeah, it's kind of tricky. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Brittany Sanders. I'm working under Dr. Emily Tucker at Corliss University, and I just this question is coming from personal experience. Without Dr. Tucker's guidance, I wouldn't be in the master's program at Corliss University. So I wanted to know, outside of what you're doing today, speaking with ISE students and professionals, what else do you do to help encourage and promote the growth of engineers that you come into contact with who might not have access or the experience that you all have or may have gotten when you were in their positions?
I've been trying to be engaged with my previous universities whenever my program director from undergrad has been in touch with me, and whenever she asked me, hey, can you talk with students that are in, we call them semesters, like 6th semester, 7th semester, what's your experience, what can you share with them? So whenever she asked me, like, I'm available. So with students, like I appreciate the people I talked to when I was a student and the mentors I've had so far. So I try to give back the same way for graduate students and undergrad as well. And whenever I hear someone looking for a job, I'm like, I know the struggle, so feel free to reach out, and if there's any way I can help, I will. So I think that's my way to give back, especially to students, and share my experience. When I was an industrial student, I never thought I would end up working in the energy field without actually studying sustainable development or a similar program. I didn't have any sustainable development course or class when I was in undergrad, and little by little I found my path to where I am. I didn't know at first why I wanted to study. So yeah, I try to talk to young people, and it's like you don't want to figure out your life when you are 15, 16, 18, so just be patient and just talk to people, and you might know about an opportunity that you don't even know it exists. So yeah.
I mean, I generally, you know, when asked, except, you know, it's like I've gone to, you know, the sort of career, but really sort of what is your major day at the local high schools and stuff like that, where, you know, so high school students can come and say, I've never heard of an industrial engineer. What is an industrial engineer? Which is, I mean, they've heard of mechanical engineers, they've heard of, you know, electrical engineers and civil engineers, but not industrial engineers, and you know, participating in organizations like this, and you know, I've spoken at some of the regional student ISE conferences, you know, and stuff. So, you know, whatever I can do to be supportive, and most of the time, you know, because of the fact that, you know, the little synopsis I gave of my career is very different from what is considered in the past the traditional industrial engineering path. You know, it is the kind of thing that, you know, some students feel, you know, that they're interested in. As I said, I graduated from Purdue last, you know, like a little over a year ago, as part of their sort of engineering 101 type of class, where in industrial engineering, where they asked alumni to give their experience. I did one of the guest lectures for, you know, for one of the classes of what I do. So whenever there's the opportunity, I'm usually willing to do that.
So I'll answer it two ways. So as a corporation, we give people 40 hours a year to use, we call it civic time. And so people will use that either to go to volunteer at things like STEM conferences. We have one woman in our division who volunteered to teach AP Calculus to a city high school that didn't have AP Calculus. So you can use that to do whatever you want. And then we also send people to colleges to talk about, I mean, it's a recruiting thing, frankly, but we will talk about the fact that if you're an undergrad, ISE, applied math or something, you're of interest to us. And we can help pay for your master's. You know, so there's a recruiting thing there. That's what the corporation does. And then on my personal side, you know, so I do much of what our local 3 high schools have STEM. Either they're not really conferences, but they're like STEM projects where they either you're a judge of STEM projects, or you work on a team that's doing like some kind of 24-hour hackathon type thing. You're like a coach. So I'll do that kind of thing now and then. But the other thing you can look for is mentoring, and I don't, you know, time is limited. So I tend to mentor veterans, and that they're not in the same boat because they're not coming this way into their career, but I mentor transitioning veterans. So that's a little bit different, but I think those who have time to do mentoring, I am a mentor for lawyers, but those are people who are already sort of in that space looking for work. But anyway, those are the sort of the big ones.
I'm curious, like in thinking about organizations certainly have cultural differences with the, within teams and even teams within a company and so forth. But do you think there's any similarities when if you find yourself in a role in government or in nonprofits that distinguish team cultures from private industry, or is it similarly just very variable by team and company?
I think a lot. Most of it's driven by the personality of the team, and a lot of that falls to the leader of the team. So you can have great and poor in either one. I think one of the biggest things about the not-for-profit world, and I have been in both, so I've been in both plus government. So the biggest thing I think that I noticed is different is in the profit matters. It is about profit. For good and bad. I mean, you're going to get paid more if you're in a for-profit company than you will in a not-for-profit or in government. Not-for-profit, we're driven by the same types of limitations on salaries because of the federal acquisition regulations, with some stipulations. But so we're not going to make Amazon Web Services salaries. That just doesn't happen. But because it's not 100% profit driven, it's driven by public interest. So you don't get to choose the work, but you can do work that's impactful. And so I think that has a lot to do with satisfaction, but that's sort of not where your question went. But so the fact that the team isn't profit driven might make decisions that are not necessarily profit driven. You see where I'm going on this? So you have a little more freedom to make decisions that the bottom line isn't the bottom line. And if the leader of the team understands that, then the team will get driven in the direction that comes up with an answer that is not all about revenue.
I worked for a profit company before starting my master's, only for a few months, but I could tell, I mean, in terms of the team culture, I was lucky to be in a good team, and my mentor was very patient, and he got me through the process until I was ready to work on my own. But he told me, I suffered when I just started in this company. The company culture was, we throw you to the pool, even if you don't know how to swim, and you'll figure it out eventually. That was his experience, and he suffered for months until he figured out his job by himself. And he told me, I suffered, I don't want you to suffer, so I'm teaching you, I'm taking the time to teach you. So I was lucky, but in terms of the company culture, it was very stressful. I worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. Like, it was very, very hard. Like, those 7 months felt like 3 years. And the culture was, the end of the month were very stressful. We're like, how much how much do we sell in the month? We hit the goals, we did not hit the goals. I remember it was one Friday. I was responsible for sending the reports at the end of the month of how much we sold and how far we got from the target. And there was one time I sent an email at 1 in the morning, and my boss's boss was like, why are you sending an email at 1 in the morning? I was like, I was supposed to send it by the end of the day, and the month closed at midnight, so I had to wait after midnight to read the report, and it was a Friday. I wanted to enjoy my weekend. So that was the culture I lived in the profit company. Now in the nonprofit, I mentioned it before, like the goals are like not on sales, like how much did we sell this month, this year, but how much money do we invest in energy projects and how much savings are we getting. So I think the mindset of helping, contributing, more community, like a more community mindset and culture. Might be also another factor could be the country, like the culture, like the cultural, the culture in different countries. But I felt the difference, like wow, like from one extreme to another. The mindset, how people will collaborate. I feel in a team that there's not competency among us. There's also my team, the engineering team. We're about 10 people. Until last year that we started hiring more people, each person, there were only 2 people from the same country, the rest 10 people from different parts of the country and different engineering backgrounds. And we all did the same job, but we all have different perspectives. So we bring different thoughts on the table, and I think that makes the team more diverse, more complete. And we always look to help each other. There's no I don't know, like envy or like, oh, you're my competition because I want to be promoted before you. Like I don't feel that culture of least in our company. So I think it varies, but in general terms, like the thinking about the goals of the company, it affects a lot in the company culture.
Yeah, I think it's.
We're past time too, but just letting people know that we're past our time. But yeah, John, you want to answer?
Well, I was going to say I agree with Rick. It really depends on the company and or the organization and who's in the leadership position. And I think for me the most frustrating situations are those where you have people who they hire you to do something, but they think they know exactly what you should do. I mean, I had one case where I got hired, and they said, we want you to do a plan, and the plan is going to come out with recommendations to do this, this, and this. And I'm like, well, if you already know the recommendations, why do you want me to do a plan? You know, and I've known other people who, you know, well, we need a supply chain person. You know, well, what is the supply chain person going to do? Well, it's going to tell you how to improve the way you do your stuff. Well, we like the way we do our stuff. You know, well, but we can, there are inefficiencies here, but we like the way we do our stuff. You know, so, you know, that can be very frustrating, but in a lot of cases, I mean, my first job at the Department of Energy, you know, the person who was in charge was very clear from day one that he felt like, you know, he didn't want to have any of his staff feel like they were being kept under a bushel basket, because he felt that the more his staff shined, the better he looked anyway, so it didn't really matter. And he viewed his job, he said, you know, my job is to get you prepared and make it so that you find the next great job for yourself. And when you start off with working for somebody like that, you know, that's a wonderful, wonderful place to be. So it really depends on the organizational culture and who's in charge.
Okay, thank everybody on the panel for the